From the likes of Aileen Wuornos, the Boston Strangler, David Berkowitz, Ted Bundy, Velma Bartfield, etc. The world has seen and gladly lost a lot of serial killers. Unfortunately, the heart of man is desperately wicked, which is why today we are here to talk about serial killers who were never captured. The I-70 Killer. The I-70 Killer is an unidentified American serial killer who is known to have killed 6 store clerks in the Midwest in spring of 1992. He got the nickname I-70 Killer because where several of his victims worked were located a few miles off of Interstate 70. His victims were usually petite brunette women, that is, with the exception of one man who could have been confused as a woman, due to him wearing his hair in a ponytail and working in a ceramics store owned and named after his mother. All of the stores the I-70 Killer committed murders at were convenience stores, and he would usually rob them of small amounts of cash. What is most terrifying about the I-70 is that all his victims were murdered in an execution style. Robin Fuldauer from Indianapolis, Indiana was shot in the back of the head at the store she worked at. The same thing happened to Patricia Myers and Patricia Smith from Wichita, Kansas on April 27th. Michael McCown became his third victim and was also shot in the back of his head. Nancy Kitzmiller also got shot in the back of the head by the I-70 Killer, and he added Sarah Blessing to his list of victims on the 7th of May, 1992. She was his last victim. The police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation concluded that they were dealing with a single suspect and warned people to be on high alert. About 4 sketches were made of the I-70 Killer, but none of them look like the same person. It's either he's a shapeshifter or the witnesses were wrong. Whatever the case, the I-70 Killer is still at large, and the case is still open 30 years later. The West Mesa Bone Collector. The West Mesa Bone Collector is a serial killer who murdered 11 women and 1 unborn child from 2001 to 2005. Their bodies were found scattered across a 100-acre plot of land being prepared for development. Almost all his victims were Hispanic, and all had connections to prostitution and drugs. They had all been reported missing between 2002 and 2005. This gruesome discovery was made when Christian Ross was out for an evening walk with her dog and stumbled upon a bone that resembled a female. Uncertain of what it was, she took a picture and sent it to her sister who works as a nurse. Her suspicions were confirmed. It was indeed a human bone. Her discovery was the catalyst that pushed the police to comb the West Mesa area near 118th Street Southwest, discovering 11 shallow graves that held the remains of 2 teens and 9 adults. Their ages ranged from 15 to 32. The names of the 11 victims were Jamie Barella, Monica Candelaria, Victoria Chavez, Virginia Cloven, Selania Edwards, Cinnamon Elks, Doreen Marquez, Julie Nieto, Veronica Romero, Evelyn Salazar, and Michelle Valdez. Because all the victims were sex workers and suffered from drug addiction, law enforcement officials concluded that the West Mesa Killer was targeting vulnerable women in the sex trade and ending their lives. This conclusion sent West Mesa police officials into the rabbit hole of drugs, prostitution, and sex trafficking. They also collaborated with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who concluded that it was the work of a serial killer. Despite their best efforts, they ended up empty-handed, leaving unanswered questions and fear in the hearts and minds of the inhabitants of West Mesa. In hopes to nab this merciless assailant, the police are offering a cash reward of up to $100,000 for whoever has any useful information. The Jeff Davis Killings. Between 2005 and 2009, the quiet town of Jennings, Louisiana, faced a series of unsolved murders. The victims, known as the Jeff Davis 8 or the Jennings 8, were 8 women whose bodies were discovered in the swamps surrounding the town of Louisiana in an already decomposing condition. The first victim was Loretta Lewis, who was found floating in a river by a fisherman on May 20, 2005. This tragic discovery marked the beginning of terrifying murders that shook the town of Jennings, Louisiana. Ernestine Marie Danielle Patterson, Kristen Gary Lopez, Whitney Dubois, Laconia Moogie Brown, Crystal Shea Benoit Zeno, Brittany Gary, and Nicole Gilly were the other 7 victims who completed the Jennings 8. All these women suffered from mental health problems, were linked to prostitution, and had drug addictions. An author and investigative reporter, Ethan Brown, delved deep into the investigation surrounding the Jeff Davis killings. He ended up uncovering a lot of missteps and controversies within the local sheriff's office. His investigation pointed suspicious fingers at the police. He also discovered that most of the victims knew each other through blood relations, or as roommates and acquaintances. Brown also discovered these women, using their connections as escorts and addicts, became police informants, giving them valuable information about human traffickers and drug lords. According to Brown, this may have led to their untimely deaths. In an attempt to address the allegations against investigators, the sheriff ordered DNA testing for every investigator working on the Jeff Davis case in 2009. However, the office has refused to comment on the results of the test, leaving the public and families of the victims confused, angry, and scared. Despite some arrests and suspects, no one has really been held accountable for the Jennings killings. The case remains open. The Eastbound Strangler. It was in the fall of 2006 when fear gripped the inhabitants of Atlantic City. 4 women, all sex workers, met a gruesome death at the hand of an unidentified killer. Their bodies were discovered in a drainage ditch behind the now demolished Golden Key Motel, sending shockwaves through the town. Molly Dilts, Kim Raffo, Barbara Bridle, and Trey Roberts were all found face down in a row, their lifeless bodies arranged in a unique display placed 6 feet apart from each other. Barbara Bridle was a 42-year-old sex worker who struggled with cocaine addiction and disappeared in 2006. Her body was so badly decomposed, the cause of death could not be determined. Molly J. Dilts was a 20-year-old prostitute. Originally from Black Lake, Pennsylvania, she was actually the first victim according to forensic analysis. Kim Raffo was a 35-year-old waitress from Brooklyn who had turned to sex work in Atlantic City. She was the last of the victims to be seen alive. According to forensics, she died by strangulation. Tracy Ann Roberts, a 23-year former exotic dancer from Delaware, also fell victim to the Eastbound Strangler. She struggled with drug addiction. She was last seen alive after being hospitalized for being hit in the throat by a man who wanted to be her pimp. The police had a lot of leads, but Terry Olson and Eldred Raymond Burchell stood out. Olson because his girlfriend with whom he had a fight with accused him of the crimes, Burchell because he had confessed to killing people. These suspects were later scrapped because there was zero evidence linking them to the crimes. In 2010, a possible connection was made between the Eastbound Strangler and Gilgo Beach killings, the Chillicothe Killer. A murderer from Chillicothe, Ohio, ended the lives of 6 women, also known as the Chillicothe Six. In the quiet city of Chillicothe, a series of murders between 2014 and 2016 sent chills down the spines of the community. Several women vanished without a trace, leaving their community in shock and terror. 4 of the women were later found dead, while the other 2 just disappeared, never to be seen again. The first woman to disappear was mother of 2, Charlotte Trugo. She was a sex worker and also suffered from drug addiction. Trugo vanished in May 2014, and her whereabouts remain unknown. Tameka Lynch, who was a friend of Trugo, was reported missing on May 3, 2014. Her body was found 3 weeks later. And although forensic reports suggested that she had illegal drugs in her system, her family believed that foul play was involved. Wanda Lemons disappeared in November 2014 and was never found. Her case remains open till date. Shasta Hemerick disappeared on the 25th of December 2014. Her body was found in the icy Scioto River. Her death was ruled a suicide. Her family, however, argued that she would never end her life. Tiffany Seuss disappeared in May 2015, and her body was found in a creek weeks later, wrapped in a sheet. The last victim, Timberly Clater, whose body was found near a vacant building, had died from a gunshot wound. In this case, Chillicothe officials had to dig into the world of prostitution and drugs to find the Chillicothe Killer, and yet again, came up empty-handed. In July of 2015, Jason McCary was convicted for the murder of Timberly Clater. His accomplice Ernest Moore III was also suspected of having information on the Chillicothe Killer and the missing girls. Unfortunately, there was zero evidence linking him to the crimes. Neil Falls. a man suspected of being a serial killer, was killed in self-defense by a woman in West Virginia. Falls had also become a person of interest, but there was zero evidence linking him to the crimes. This left the community heartbroken and gripped in fear. The River City Ripper, also known as the Little Rock Killer, struck the Little Rock community on the 24th of August 2020. He made 64-year-old Larry Eugene McChristian his first victim. The Ripper had stabbed McChristian and left his body on a stranger's porch. Though the brutal attack was captured on camera, the suspect's face was not visible. 1 month later, the River City Ripper struck again. On September 23, 2020, 62-year-old Jeff Welch's body was discovered on his front porch with a puncture wound to his neck. His tragic death confirmed the presence of a serial killer. On April 11, 2021, 41-year-old Deborah Walk was attacked and stabbed 15 times by an unknown assailant. Surprisingly, Deborah made a full recovery and was able to give vital information about the Ripper. Sadly, the Ripper was still able to evade justice. Less than 24 hours after Deborah's attack, 40-year-old Marlon Anthony Franklin was found stabbed to death, further solidifying the connection between the cases. The Little Rock Police, in collaboration with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, relentlessly worked to get this monster off the streets with no luck. They decided to advise the Little Rock community to stay home in the late hours of the night and early hours of the mornings, because that is when the Ripper strikes. They're also offering a $20,000 reward for anyone who has any information on the Ripper. The Smiley Face Killer. The Smiley Face Killer first emerged in 1990 when investigative journalists Gannon and Duarte began investigating a series of mysterious deaths involving young men found dead in bodies of water across several Midwestern American states. The victims were often successful, good-looking, athletic, college-aged men who had been seen leaving bars in a drunken state. It was during their investigation that Gannon and Duarte made a terrifying discovery. Graffiti resembling a smiley face had been seen close to the location where almost all the victims' bodies were discovered. This discovery led them to theories that the deaths weren't just drunken accidents like the police had earlier concluded, but cold-blooded murders. The Smiley Face murders gained popularity when Gannon and Duarte published their textbook titled Case Studies in Drowning Forensics. This publication brought about a wider audience, pushing law officials to delve deeper into the case. While some officials agreed with Gannon and Duarte, most were against their theories and insisted that the deaths were drunken accidents. The Center for Homicide Research also published a research paper claiming the smiley faces found near the bodies were not identical and therefore could not have been drawn by the same person. They also argued in that same paper that the absence of trauma and lack of drugs in the system of the victims proves that there was neither a struggle nor drugging, which proves that there were accidents. In an FBI statement, they agreed that while Gannon and Duarte have a point, they have no evidence to prove their theory. Unfortunately for them, the public is asking the obvious question. Isn't that their job? To this day, a good number of people and even family members of the victims insist the deaths were murders. The Chicago Strangler. This case is one of those cases that have left the public divided. Is it a serial killer or a bunch of different killers who could also be serial killers? From 1999 to 2019, 50 women, mostly of African American descent, have been found strangled to death in the west and south sides of Chicago. The first woman, Charlotte Day, 42, was found strangled to death in March of 2001, and the last victim, Lara Dawn Harbin, was found strangled in May of 2019. The killer took a break in 2014, leading people to believe he had been arrested, and resumed killing in 2017. Due to the police insistence that the murders were unrelated, the killer or killers have not been captured. Last but not the least, the Long Island murders, also known as the Gilgo Beach killings. The Gilgo Beach killer worked under the radar for years until Shannon Gilbert, a 23-year-old sex worker, made a frantic call to the police claiming someone was after her life. She then took off running, never to be seen again. While in search for Gilbert, authorities found 4 decaying bodies of women whom they later identified as Maureen Brianard Barnes, Amber Costello, Megan Waterman, and Melissa Bartholomew. These women were all petite and in their 20s and were working as escorts. The similarities between the victims raised suspicions of a serial killer. The police discovered 6 more bodies in 2011, raising the total number of victims to 10. The new victims were Jessica Taylor, Valerie Mack, an unidentified toddler, an unidentified Asian male, and a victim nicknamed Peaches. The police continued their search since Gilbert was still missing. Sadly, her remains were found in December 2011. However, officials believe her death was accidental. For a decade, the police had no clue who the Gilgo killer could be. In 2022, a task force found Rex Heuermann's DNA on one of the victims. He was also spotted where the bodies were found, and even more damning, burner phones linked him to the victims. Amber Costello's roommate, Dave Schuller, also identified Heuermann. He's being held without bond for multiple counts of murder and still hasn't been charged. This means the victims haven't gotten justice yet, and the hunt for justice continues.